It's the original Untitled Goose Game, here on NES Works episode 68. One final 1987 release based on a movie license, this time from Konami. Unfortunately, this one's not quite up to the standards of The Goonies 2. Top Gun is, of course, based on the 1985 Tom Cruise flick by the same name. Personally, I would have made a Top Gun game about dudes playing volleyball to cater to the slobbering over guys with good abs market that has been woefully underserved by the NES to date, but Konami went the more obvious route and made a game about F-14 Tomcat combat. Top Gun puts its catchiest movie hooks right up front. The game begins with a solid chiptune rendition of the Top Gun anthem playing over a copyright indicia and title screen, and once you launch your first mission, you're treated to a great full-screen rendition of a Tomcat fighter preparing for takeoff from a carrier blacktop. I have to admit that, as a child of the 1980s who grew up with a media diet of G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Robotech, the F-14 is an indelible icon of a time when my generation was young and stupid enough to think that endless military conflict was cool and fun, thanks in no small part to movies like Top Gun. So even now, seeing the jet in action tickles some part of my reptile brain. The endorphins fade pretty quickly once the game itself kicks in, though. Top Gun is the second flight sim we've seen on NES, after Star Voyager, and it's much less ambitious. Rather than spanning the galaxy and involving trade for upgrades to thwart an invading enemy fleet, Top Gun is a 4-stage, arcade-style shooter in which you take on a seemingly endless array of enemy aircraft, naval vessels, and ground forces. And I do mean arcade-style. Top Gun plays like a buttoned-down version of Sega's Afterburner, which debuted a few months before this hit NES. While there really wasn't enough time between Afterburner's arcade release and Top Gun's arrival to allow for Konami to develop, manufacture, and distribute an NES cartridge, it's possible that the Top Gun team encountered Sega's game at a trade show or test location ahead of launch and thought, good idea. Or maybe both dev teams simply happened upon a similar solution for the same problem: how to make a game based on Top Gun. While Afterburner may not have had the license, it was definitely, unquestionably, undeniably inspired by the movie. It was also a lot more exciting than Konami's game. It's kind of not a fair comparison though, as Afterburner ran on Sega's cutting-edge arcade board and had an incredible force feedback flight yoke built into the cabinet. Top Gun was running on 4-year-old hardware that had been designed to be inexpensive and play a decent version of Donkey Kong. Konami did the best anyone could manage on the console because, frankly, the numerous NES flight sims to follow in Top Gun's wake were no more impressive than what was accomplished here with 128 kilobits of data on a UN ROM chip. Well, that's not quite true. Top Gun's Japanese release, which shipped a month after the US version, is a little more impressive. It actually has in-game music, something inexplicably lacking in the American game. But in short, the NES is not the ideal go-to system for flight sims. Top Gun gives you 3 Tomcats, durable enough to shrug off a few bullet impacts, loaded with infinite machine gun ammo, and capable of carrying a loadout of missiles. You can equip yourself with 10 powerful missiles, 20 mid-strength missiles, or 40 puny missiles at the start of a mission. Missiles deliver more damage than machine gun bursts do, and they can lock onto enemies that pass through your targeting reticle. But they need to be launched in moderation. Enemies also fire missiles at you, often in sets of 3, and one single hit will knock your Tomcat out of the sky. That's not the only hazard here. You can also run out of fuel midway through all but the very first training mission. When your plane reaches critical status, you'll hear a warning and can summon a fuel ship for a mid-air rendezvous. If you manage to line up your nose cone with the umbilicus, you'll top off your juice and your missiles somehow in a single go. Take too long to connect and the fueling plane flies off and leaves you to crash, which is kind of harsh. You also need to land your plane on an aircraft carrier in order to complete each mission. Here, you need to manage your speed, altitude, and angle of descent on your approach, otherwise you'll splash into the ocean. It can be difficult to land safely until you figure out the precise speed and altitude numbers the game expects. But it's a pretty harrowing finale to an extended dogfight sequence. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot to Top Gun. After the initial training mission, there are 3 other missions in which you take down an enemy aircraft carrier, a base, and a space shuttle gantry. Based on the map you're shown before each mission, these sorties appear to take place in Iraq, Iran, and the Persian Gulf, just like now, because we are trapped in an infinite, horrible loop of history. The game itself is okay. It's nowhere near as exciting as Afterburner, but it does feel more fair. The most frustrating thing about Top Gun is that you only get 3 planes to complete all 4 missions. when your last plane is trashed, you have to start over from the beginning, and given that Mission 2 is probably the hardest stage in the game, you'll end up playing the boring training mission over and over, only to get wiped out over the Red Sea again. As a final statement from Konami for 1987, Top Gun doesn't land with the same impressive impact that Gradius did for 1986. But there was so much other good stuff released in that distinctive silver trim throughout the year that it's hard to complain. And there are some true classics inbound from Konami for 1988. Data East's Breakthru, on the other hand, feels very much like a Data East 1987 release. In fact, it's even going to be beaten at its own game by one of Konami's 1988 releases, Jackal. If that doesn't say Data East, I don't know what does. Once again, Breakthru is based on an arcade game. It's a pretty faithful conversion too, carrying forward all the same mechanics, enemies, level layouts, and even enemy placements so far as the NES could manage. It's not especially great or fun, and it looks a whole lot worse than the arcade game, but that too is extremely Data East. Breakthru is a strange game because it initially appears to be a shooter, but it kind of isn't. You control an armored combat car equipped with a forward machine gun, and your goal is to fight your way through an entire enemy army and retrieve a special fighter jet they've stolen. You travel through rocky terrain, across bridges, along a prairie, into a city under martial law, and finally smash up a military base in your relentless quest to trade an amazing automobile for an airplane. Yours is no ordinary shooting car though, it's a jumping shooting car. Before long, it becomes clear that the most effective combat strategy here is often not to fight. Your forward and backward movement changes the rate at which the screen scrolls, which is a neat way to give players a little control over an auto-scrolling action game, but it also means your car's fine controls are pretty clumsy. It's really hard to evade enemy fire at the last second, and you can just forget about quick acceleration to jump a barrier. Breakthru is a game that demands memorization and rote reflex, and the hazards eventually start to come so quickly and so heavily that your safest bet is just to throttle up your speed and spend as much time in the air as you possibly can. There are some frustrating sticking points to contend with in Breakthru. For example, anytime helicopters appear and launch car-seeking boomerang missiles, it's even odds as to whether you'll make it through alive. You'll also encounter way too many instances where you're expected to have committed the level layout to memory and crank up your speed to clear an otherwise impossible leap well in advance of it appearing on screen. The one big saving grace here is that Breakthru is pretty generous with its checkpoints. Unlike, say, Kid Nicky, you don't have to start each stage from the beginning each time you fail. I guess you could kind of think of Breakthru as a sort of mixture of Bump and Jump and Sega's ZAXXON. The leaping vehicle is definitely reminiscent of the former, while the forced perspective and gimmicks, such as low walls in military bases and bombardment by off-screen missile barrages, really speaks to the latter. It's not as good as either, but it's tolerable. And as cooperative two-player shooters on NES go, it sure is a hell of a lot more fun to play than Ikari Warriors. Yeah, that's a low bar to clear, but sometimes you take what you can get. Next time on NES Works, prithee hark unto a tale of the NES's first fully Western production.